Hey, what's up? It's Jim, and today I'm going to talk about Unfriended Dark Web. Although when the first Unfriended came out, it was kind of a different sort of horror film. It was probably the one theatrical experience that you probably should have maybe seen on your computer screen over the theater. It was a different thing because you saw people using Skype and Facebook, not using whatever the movie companies like rip-off versions or versions just for the movie were. It was a little different. It wasn't that inventive. It was just a junky kind of horror film. People probably overhated it. And then we didn't hear anything about it until this film 3 years later. Why did they wait 3 years for a film that looks like they probably shot it in like an afternoon? I have no clue. It doesn't really make a lot of sense to me. I guess Blumhouse had other stuff going on these past 3 years or something. I think Unfriended Dark Web kind of makes the original look a lot more well thought out than this one is. And that's a lot to do with like when you're in a horror film. And when you talk about horror movies, you're usually talking about like the kills, the body count, who the villain, monster, whatever killer person is. But you don't talk about really the victim or the person that you are following. And unless you can get the conceit of what they're doing while you are following them and how it's important for you to follow them or want to follow them to a certain degree or not be super annoyed by them and just like passively follow them, you have to kind of follow these protagonists. And in this, you have this one character, Mattis or whatever, played by Colin Woodell. And as he has gotten this computer that he found in a lost and found and is using it to make these Skype calls and is going through his computer, and it's not his, and going through it and finding more and more deep, dark, secret information, at first you're like, okay, you found this computer, okay, you're not going to look up like what these email addresses are on the Facebook and the Skype, and you see the email on Slack and Facebook and things, and he doesn't even try to look it up. And first you're like, this is a little weird, but as he keeps going in and in, there's a difference between like wanting to see and going with a certain character's curiosity and just being frankly stupid to a certain degree. The believability in how he got into this mess was just frankly ridiculous, and it almost like doesn't work as well because you're not really getting like, I don't really know much about him as a character other than he stole this laptop, he has a girlfriend, he uses sign language, but as a character, like what are his interests other than that he has a bike and a bed according to his webcam? The other characters, you understand like one character's mom is dying and that she's just recently gotten engaged. You have another character who is English and likes computers, I guess. Another guy, AJ, who was played by a guy who used to be on Level Up, which was everybody's favorite Cartoon Network show. It has a web show or something where he talks about the internet or something. That's not really clear. Or this one girl who has keyboards behind her, so I guess she does music. But there's a little like something there. One of the things the original Unfriended did, as you go on, you slowly learn more and more about these people and their deepest secrets and who they really were through their cyberbullying and things like that. But Unfriended Dark Web doesn't really do that. It's about this mystery of the dark web and all that Thor stuff that scares me and I don't really want to go on to and watch like weird creepypasta sort of videos about, but like I literally have no clue about any of it. But the way they're doing this mystery, a lot of the hacking in this is just beyond like, I don't think any of that is real. It's like, it doesn't take a supernatural angle like the original ended up doing, but in this one it takes like a supernatural angle in the fact that like some of the hacking they're doing is like frankly insane. It feels like something in the 90s where they're like, the internet will probably be able to do this, so we'll like let them do this, like ordering a pizza. Still can't do that shit online. So it's like, in this, it's like they just do like way too many things with the internet. They're just like, what? Then there's simple things like he keeps getting these Facebook messages as notifications on the side of his desktop, and he's logged into a different Facebook, but it's like, how is he getting those notifications? Like, is he just open on Firefox or Google Chrome somewhere? And he uses Safari a lot, so I already don't like this person. Like, too many things in this that just like had huge gaps of logic, or they would just make such big leaps and I'd be like, see, so this means this, and go, wait, I feel like we need like another scene, and they're like, this means this, we're moving on. And you're like, I mean, that's cool because this movie's not that great, so I want to save time here, but like, this just feels like bad stories. I mean, there's one point where he goes like, oh, it's a trick, it was a lure to get us to do this thing and all this stuff, and I was like, where did you get that? That just came out of nowhere. It's like, sure, I was thinking it, but like, you don't really have much evidence. You just like proclaim it. Maybe they cut that scene out or something. I don't really know. When you're following these protagonists and you don't immediately like connect to them, and this film, like, none of the acting's very good. None of the characters are that great. It really feels like something like in Friday the 13th 2, I remember there are certain characters that were so annoying, I just wanted them to get murdered. And in this, I don't really want anyone to get murdered necessarily. I mean, in life I don't. In this, it's like, it's not that they annoy me, it's more that I'm just, well, the first guy annoys me. The main guy, Midas or whatever, the main guy annoys me. Matt, or whatever. The main guy sort of annoys me, but the rest I'm fine with, but I sort of also like don't really care that much about them. I will say, when this film, like, to get to the part where like they're in the deep web and people are trying to get them, that took like way too long. And it almost felt like the building of that was some of the worst parts of this movie. I mean, it gets better, like, when they get into, like, the actual, like, murdering them and what this inner circle thing will do or whatever. The film is the best it's ever going to be. It's, like, sort of empty suspense because, like, I don't really care about these people. But I also, like, would prefer they not get murdered a little bit. I'm just sort of, like, kind of in it more for the suspense of, like, oh, that's a person there. And I guess they have a thing and loved ones maybe, and like you kind of like connect to it on that level. That reaches like the height, I guess, of Unfriended's like cheap beer horror moviness, where you're just like, oh cool, I just wanted a scare, I got a scare, okay, succeeded movie. It kind of like gets there, but I'd say it like gets there on an emptier level than even the first Unfriended, which I think is a bit of an accomplishment. Most of the acting's pretty bad, but they have Betty Gabriel, who was in Get Out as the housekeeper and was also in The Purge election year, but she's like too good for this movie. She kind of messes up the grade curve of this whole movie, because it's just like she as an actress knows exactly what she's doing, and feels like everybody else is like typical horror movie people, and it's like somehow this great actress got in all these horror movies, and I think we're all the better for it. But it is sort of like, you're like, why, how did you get in this, what's going on? Suddenly she's on screen, you're like, oh, I feel like I should demand more of Unfriended Dark Web. I don't know. It does like play off of the paranoia of the deep web or the dark web, but it doesn't like scare me as much as like watching videos on YouTube late at night and like thinking about what can really happen to you. And it's sort of like Nerve, if you saw that movie. But the difference between this and Nerve is that Nerve got that it needs to understand that it is ultimately a fantasy. There isn't an app called Nerve, spoilers, in real life, spoilers, unless there is, but I don't think there is. But in this, like, they're using a real tangible thing, but they're not doing anything with it. Well, the cool thing about Nerve is, like, also it had Dave Franco and Emma Roberts, and, you know, it knew sort of what it was doing and understand the kind of teen, kind of cultish, like, neon light sort of movie it was being. And Unfriended Dark Web, like, doesn't get that. It, like, sort of tries to be like, hey, see, this is what it's like, but when the bad guys come in, you, like, kind of can't see them on your camera or something. They come in, like blended into the background or something, which is, like, I've never heard of that nonsense. It's like wanting to have the fantasy of the internet while trying to say something real, man. But it like didn't have enough fun to like really get into it. I almost sort of didn't understand why sometimes they don't cut away from the screen. It felt like they're more hindered by it. Like the first one felt inventive, and that was like the main thing it had going for it. And this, I'm like, I mean, are we just like gonna keep just staying on this computer screen the whole time? I mean, I guess so. I would like to see the computer screen of the character who's like, you know, the third one down who gets murdered halfway through. Like, what's their life like? They're like, I've been thrown into this thing. I would be sort of down with seeing this movie from the different perspectives. I mean, I wouldn't actually, but on a conceptual idea level, I would be down for it. Each kill has to be like different and inventive, and I sort of like that. I think ultimately the problem with the Unfriended franchise is it doesn't like go into internet kind of magic in a way like that's like fun to watch. It's more just like still in that way, like you don't know how this works, do you? But you read a lot of paranoid stuff, so you think you know how it works. It's like when someone tells you like they're just going to steal all your information from the internet, and like, well, what kind of information? And they're like your name and age, and you're like, oh, that's not how it works, but okay. It just really doesn't have a love for it, but it also doesn't get like the kooky stupidness of it. You could really have a lot of fun, junky thrills with this, but it's like it doesn't really get into that. It's like trying to be too serious. But there are certain suspenseful sequences, like when the person's internet keeps going out who they're connected to, so they have to like plan and do things, and then when their green light comes back, they're like, oh, the internet's back, and they can't talk about it. That scene was done very well. Unfriended Dark Web just plays like, you know, a lesser shitty Unfriended movie, which sounds pretty bad. I think I'm more annoyed by this one. Like, I didn't really get annoyed by the first one, and in this one I sort of get it more, because it just doesn't make sense, and it makes huge leaps at certain points. I'm just like, where are you going with this? And I sort of like this coming against cyberbullying thing of the last one. I know people didn't like the supernatural element of it at all, but that just felt more like something, you know, an online thing, and it gave me a reason for them to like, almost like, not that it justified killing those kids, but it's sort of like you understand why someone's coming after them specifically. And this felt more like in the random way, but it didn't really ever like own it the way like something like, you know, like Michael Myers did in the original Halloween. He like has no rhyme or reason, he's just going after people. And in this it feels like they sort of have a rhyme or reason, but they don't, but they're supposed to be scary, but it's not. I would say Unfriended is just a crappy cheap beer horror movie, but it's a crappy cheap beer horror movie about the internet that never really gets into the kind of fun that you could have with that. And we'd probably, in terms of people who make stuff on the internet, would be cool with an Unfriended, silly, dumb, like kitschy kind of movie. We'd have fun with it, but this doesn't do that. It feels like from people who don't understand the medium they're talking about, put in all sorts of craziness. So it's like these like magic magicians of the internet and hacking and things, when you're like, I don't think that would actually work that way. It seems like Unfriended doesn't really care about that. It just cares about coming in, coming out, and making a cheap kind of silly, dumb little horror movie. And I guess it succeeds to a certain degree, but it definitely like takes a while to get there and feels like such an imperfect kind of dumb cheap horror movie. You'll probably think about like, yeah, that was fine, but can we watch something else? And I think Unfriended Dark Web, I don't even really want to say it's fine. I think it just is a dumb junky horror film. It sort of falls in line with what the original sort of did. It doesn't really have the surprise of being this different thing, and also doesn't have as much fun with the characters, kind of like going on to like this such a different bent that doesn't really work out. I'm hoping Unfriended 3 kind of like realizes what they had going for them in the first one and just forget about that kind of stuff and forget all about those kind of sensical things and go kind of more crazier in 3. Like, let's have some fun with it. Let's do some crazy stuff. Like, instead of this, it just feels like some 50-year-old's like crazy paranoid fantasy of what the internet might be. Unfriended Dark Web makes me feel like we're still in the age before writers and directors had actually been on the internet, were making movies about the internet. And this just feels like one of those. Like, you go from a film that like feels like, oh, you're really getting the online life and like, you know, having all these things open at the same time, and like Spotify and Skype and Safari for some reason, and like, you know, FaceTiming with people. This is like how kids live and so forth. And this, it's like that's almost a foregone conclusion, and it's not really saying anything other than like, hey, we had to make it this way because like the last one did it. And I guess it's trying to be different. I'm sure they won't make Unfriended movies like this again, but I wish they would just have more fun with this movie. You know, you're making an Unfriended movie, so like you might as well like really go for it. Unfriended Dark Web really goes for the kind of fun, junky little premise it has, and makes me, you know, kind of sit there and laugh and clap at the whole thing. Instead, it's just another kind of junky horror sequel that I'll soon kind of forget about and brush under my feet and kind of walk on by through. Unfriended kind of follows suit in what happens to most horror franchises as they go on and lose much of their point and kind of go in this kind of listless way of just kind of going through the motions of sequels. And it seems like Unfriended Dark Web has led us down that road earlier than most franchise can imagine, which doesn't really say much to the health of this going on past this. So I'm going to do a quick spoiler thing because there are actually 2 different endings in theaters, and I wanted to talk about that, but that was pretty much the review. So if you don't want to be spoiled, just stop watching, I guess. So, spoilers. So, at the end of the version I saw, the main character, Midas or whatever, Mattis, he's like hit by a car, and because they vote whether he should live or die. I'm assuming that the vote, I don't know what the other ending is, and apparently they will be played at random, so there's no way you can actually see both in theaters, which I think is sort of dumb, because I'm sure there are people who would pay to see both the different endings in theaters if they knew how to do that, but it seems like they won't let you. My theory, that's based on nothing, is that the other version is he sort of has to live with like all his friends being dead and the cops coming after him, and that's the other darker ending, which I could see happening. I don't know, but that's kind of my insinuation. If you did see the other version, please write down in the comments and write like spoilers all around it so nobody is spoiled. I sort of thought it was sort of a fine ending, but basically everyone gets murdered because this guy like can't return a computer, or they were like kind of lured in or whatever. It's kind of an interesting way to like make a movie nowadays. One thing I applaud Unfriended, and almost what I wanted to see in theaters, is to support kind of weirder, different things like this happening, and it really hasn't happened since the original Clue, so I'm actually very curious to see that ending. I hope they release both endings online or something. It actually makes a fairly uninteresting movie a lot more interesting to talk about, just because of this ending thing, which is like actually sort of a good strategy, because it's going to make me actually want to talk about Unfriended 2 with most people, when if this hadn't happened, I'd be like, I saw Unfriended 2, and they'd be like, fuck off, I don't know you. And now they'd be like, fuck off, I don't know you, but also, which ending did you see? What's the deal with that? I think it's made people curious about a film, which in itself does not bring a lot of curiosity. So if you have seen Unfriended Dark Web and you would like to talk about it, then comment below in the comments and subscribe if you would like to.